Hey everybody, my name is Andrew. I'm a 21-year-old trans guy, and with this video, I kind of want to address some of the rationalizations or arguments people give to defend the statement, I could never date a trans person, or trans people aren't my type, or anything along those lines where people try to say that they couldn't date a trans person without really knowing trans people, without having talked to a trans person, without knowing anything about trans people at all, really. Okay, so uh, my personal definition of transphobia is anytime you're going to treat, talk to, act towards, whatever, a trans person differently than a cis person, and specifically because they are transgender, that is transphobia. You kind of have to take into account that we live in a social atmosphere where trans people are murdered daily and where trans people don't have rights, don't have bodily autonomy, don't have representation. Like, how many stories have you actually heard from trans people that most people have heard, and it's not a lot, right? So most of the ideas that we have are misconceptions that come from the majority and are usually like explanations or excuses for mistreating trans people, right? It's a lot easier to make somebody into a villain or make somebody into some sort of monster than it is to recognize that you have just disrespected their humanity, right? So, my first issue with saying I can never date a trans person is you are lumping together a huge group of people into one, like, weird idea that you have of what a trans person is, right? So, you're lumping together trans men, trans women, non-binary people, people who identify as transgender, who may be intersex. You're lumping together so many people, and you have no idea. Like, it's just so many identities all at once. Like, you don't know how many people you're talking about. You don't know if you're talking about like people that you talk to every single day, or you sit next to, or people that are your friends. Like, trans people are everywhere, and we come in all different shapes and sizes and all different kinds of identities, right? So you can't like accurately say I cannot date a trans person and have like one trans person in mind or one idea of a trans person in mind, because you are invalidating so many identities. So some of the things people also want to talk about is they want to talk about wanting to have biological children. Not every cis person can have biological children, so trying to defend your transphobic statement of I can never date a trans person by saying you want biological children, well, that means you also kind of have to have the backdrop of like every time you are talking to a cisgender person who has the potential to be a partner, are you asking them if they can have children? Because you are immediately making the assumption that all trans people can't have children when you make that statement. That's like basically what that looks like to me is you're on a date with a trans person and you're like they're like, oh, so by the way, I'm transgender, and your immediate reaction is, oh, you can't have children, like I'm out, like this is it, I'm done, like I can't talk to you anymore, right? But you don't know anything about that person. You don't know if they can reproduce, you don't know if they want to reproduce, and likewise you're not making those same comments, you don't have that same standard for cis people, because it's not, you don't have like the first date where you're like, oh, can you have babies, that's all I want is babies. You're not doing that. You're getting to know somebody, you're falling in love with somebody, you're building a life with somebody, and then if children happen and you guys agree upon it, then it happens, right? So it just it doesn't make any sense. It's just an excuse, and it doesn't stand by any hard evidence. Because there are plenty of trans people that can't have babies. Okay, so another reason why people, they say like, oh well, I'm straight, I couldn't date a trans person. Well, sexuality has nothing to do with people who are transgender. Your personal sexuality has nothing to do with the person that you date, right? So you could date somebody and later they came out as transgender. I mean, that just means that you dated somebody who was transgender. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Your sexuality is not challenged because you want to date somebody who's transgender, just because you believe that like their genitals mean something, right? Whatever genitals they may or may not have, first of all, is not up to you. Second of all, you don't know, and you can't make wild assumptions that people have a specific anatomy that they don't, because you're not doing the same thing to cis people, right? And yeah, that doesn't make any sense. That's not cool. You can't do that. Um, your sexuality is your sexuality. Nobody's interested in changing your sexuality. That is not our goal. Like, we have some sort of idea that trans people are like weird and like predatory, and that we're just trying to like sneak in and like make people gay or weird or queer or whatever. But we're not. That's not. We're 0% interested in that. So your sexuality is not going to take any blows if you date a trans person. If anybody tries to throw that at you and you're more concerned with their misconceptions and what they view of you than you are concerned with the person that is trying to build a life with you, then you don't even deserve that person anyways, honestly. And that brings me over to genitals. You don't know what genitals somebody has. You don't. You have no idea. Trans people all don't have the same looking bodies, and we don't all have the same surgeries, and we don't all have surgery, and we don't have all the same bodies to begin with. And when it comes to having sex and when it comes to being intimate with somebody in a physical way, um, sex itself is just inherently weird and different, and it's a personal experience between two people that shouldn't be commercialized and shouldn't have to live up to like social standards. Like, that is something you are doing with somebody else. That is a beautiful moment that you're having with somebody else, or a hot moment, or a moment, whatever, however you're doing your thing, right? Um, and you shouldn't be like placing before you get to know somebody like, well, what would sex be like with them? Because you don't know. You don't know if you're gonna meet a cis person one day and maybe they can't have the same sex that you're used to having. Like, you are making these initial huge assumptions about trans people without getting to know a single trans person, and that is not okay. So that's kind of what I got. I hope that was pretty coherent. I hope that came across really well. I kind of worked on this a couple different times trying to make it come out right. Um, so don't say I want to date a trans person. It doesn't make any sense. Um, Stop trying to make trans people like into one specific looking trans person you have in your head. Like, get to know a trans person and let there be ready. Let people be themselves. Let people like get to know a human being. Um, yeah. Okay, that's what I got. I hope you guys have an awesome day. See ya.